When filmmaker Sian-Pierre Regis began his career in journalism, working for MTV and CNN, he never planned on directing a feature-length film. This all changed when Sian-Pierre's 75-year-old mother was fired from her lifelong job as a hotel housekeeper.
My anxiety was very high. What is my mom going to do? And as sort of the hours went on, I started to think about this job was everything to this woman, always had been. What is she going to do without it? How is she going to survive financially? How is she going to survive mentally? Who is her support system? Like all of those questions really started to flood in. And that was the point at which my mind really went into sort of like journalist mode. Like, I want all of the answers.
Sian-Pierre began filming the events that transpired as his mother lost her job and struggled to find economic security. Unbeknownst to him, Sian-Pierre was filming what would years later become his first feature-length documentary, Duty Free. The film follows Sian-Pierre as he takes his mother on a bucket list adventure, doing many of the things that she missed out on when she was working, while also examining the challenges of economic insecurity that many people of her generation are facing. The film would go on to play in theaters nationwide, have its broadcast debut on PBS Independent Lens, and receive a prestigious IDA Award nomination. But many challenges were faced before the project was completed. Coming up, this is how Sian-Pierre independently produced Duty Free. From the New York City Center for Media Education, this is CME Presents, where we explore how the digital stories and media that we watch, listen to, and experience are created. I'm Jacob, and this is a conversation with director Sian-Pierre. Usually we start these things by saying something like, Sian-Pierre, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
The artifice is real, isn't it?
Yeah, right.
It's a pleasure to discuss your film, Duty Free, which, of course, was distributed, I believe, in 2021. But I think sometimes it can be really useful to look back in retrospect when you're not in the middle of the storm trying to figure out how to create this film and distribute it. But before we do, where does the journey begin? You became a journalist first. Is that something that was always your goal, to become a journalist or some type of storyteller?
Yes, in a way. I always wanted to be an MTV VJ, which I hope you remember, so I don't date myself too much.
I'm right there with you.
Okay, good. Yeah, right?
So you're like, I'm going to be Carson Daly when I grow up.
Exactly.
Game over. That's
exactly.
me.
I'm going to be Carson Daly, or I'm going to be Ryan Seacrest. And that was always the goal. And so I left college and started as an assistant in the news department at BET, which is Viacom, and worked my way up to being on TV. And I did that for a few years and sort of started to build on the stories that I wanted to tell, started to kind of hone my voice in some ways. And then I moved on to MTV and CNN, being on camera at both of those places, interviewing celebrities, but also being out in the streets for like Black Lives Matter movements, interviewing some of the protesters, et cetera, and just loved telling stories. I just never realized that I would be able to turn the camera on myself and my family to tell ours.
Did you ever have aspirations to become a feature filmmaker, or was that not even on the radar?
Never on the radar.
Okay.
I think probably the most I ever thought that I would be involved in film would be that I would be in them. I think I always, when I was younger, part of the reason I wanted to be on TV was to be seen, to sort of connect with an audience. And so I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll be an actor. And I acted through college and acted after college and sort of thought maybe I would take that route. Never did I think that I would actually direct a film. Even starting with Duty Free, I was trying to offer the directing job up. Like, I really thought somebody else should do it.
You're like not interested.
Yeah, or I just thought I can't do this. Like, what? I don't even know what directing means,
So you're working as a journalist, and I don't know how many years, but a bunch of years, and then you receive information from your mother that kind of catapults you into this new space of filmmaking you never expected. Can you explain what happened?
So I'd been at CNN and HLN for 2 years at that point and started to get some calls from my mom that she was feeling like kind of pushed out at work, right? They were taking responsibilities away from her. They were questioning her. And this is a woman who not only lived in the building for about 40 years, but had built that hotel truly from the ground up for the last, 10, 12 years. And so to me, it just didn't make sense. It didn't add up.
When you say built it from the ground up, can you elaborate just in terms of the kind of work she was doing?
Yes. So my mom, throughout my entire life, was always an executive housekeeper at different hotels in Boston. And we were raised in the YWCA building in Boston. The YWCA turned the building into a for-profit entity to make money, which some nonprofits do. And they thought a strategy would be to create a hotel within this building that they had because it was really centrally located to everything in Boston. And they thought, well, we've never run a hotel before, but we do know this woman who lives in this building who has run, the back end of the house for so many hotels. And so they hired my mom to run the hotel and literally turn rooms that used to be offices into hotel rooms. So she had been working there for 12 years, got all of these calls, kept calling me. I didn't know what to do. And then all of a sudden, I got a call one day that just said, I'm fired. Call me. Bye.
When you get in touch with her, what are you thinking at the time? Do you remember how you're feeling?
Oh, my God, yes. My knees sort of caved. I just sort of I didn't fall to the floor, but I practically fell to the floor only because I was far away at the time. I received the call when I was in Paris. So I felt really like I couldn't be helpful to her at that moment, truly sit beside her and work through it. And so my anxiety was very high. What is my mom going to do? And as sort of the hours went on, I started to think about, wow, this job was everything to this woman, always had been. What is she going to do without it? How is she going to survive financially? How is she going to survive mentally? Who is her support system? All of those questions really started to flood in. And then the anger started to flood in, sort of what? This doesn't make sense. Why? And that was the point at which my mind really went into sort of journalist mode. I want all of the answers. I'm going to uncover, turn over every rock and figure this out. And that really started the film in earnest.
Carson Daly never did that.
Never did that.
That's right.
It's funny though. I mean,
maybe he did. I honestly don't know.
Maybe he did. I mean, I was always more like the MTV News person versus the TRL person. I always cared about social justice, and so yeah, it's definitely a step up, I think, from what I always dreamed I could be.
All right. Just wanted to point that out.
No shade to Carson Daly.
That's right. We all love him. He's a legend. But,
exactly.
But to go back to that, so you talk about kind of this feeling of helplessness, which I think a lot of us feel when we get to the age that, one of our parents is on their own. How do you negotiate that in your mind when you're saying, okay, I'm angry, I want answers? At what point do you go from, I need to take care of my mother, to, oh yeah, and also we're going to make this huge feature film over the years?
That's a great question. So initially, when I started to get the calls, I did go home to Boston and tape my mom telling me what was going on. And I always did that just because I wanted some level of proof, of testimony from her about what exactly was happening. And so I had sort of, recorded her complaints. I also was able to shoot her on the job while she was still working. I had the sort of foresight to say, take me through a room. Let me see how, good you are at your job. I want to see you go through and do this. It was all for proof. It was all the journalist in me. And then after she was fired was when I started to sort of, to your point, there was a role reversal. I started to essentially be her advocate in a way that she was always my advocate growing up, right? If there was ever an issue at school or ever, something I couldn't figure out, my mom was there to step to the plate and ask the questions that needed to be asked. And so when she was fired, my gut was part journalist. Yes, I want to know the answers, but part defender, part advocate to say, my mom's not signing any papers. And I actually have extra questions for you. So you're going to need to speak to me about exactly what went down. And that's how it happened. And I would begin to interface with the people who fired her just to get more info. And this entire film, Duty Free, took so many turns, behind the scenes in terms of what exactly the story was that I was trying to tell. So because it's a personal story, so much of it it depends on how I'm doing personally as the director, right? Like what, or how my mom is doing and how we're doing that together. Like how are we processing what is going on? And so the film at first was, burn it all down, call out the YWCA, scream age discrimination from the rooftops. But then as we went on these journeys, we go on a bucket list adventure to do everything my mom wasn't able to do while she was working within the film, sort of lift her spirits. Then it became a film about love and connection and what makes a life and regret. And so the biggest challenge and task of the film was to try and weave together those storylines and have it processed, even though I was processing it in the making of the film.
I'm glad you brought that up because as I was watching it, that was one of my biggest questions. Because it would have been very easy, and rightfully so, to make strictly a film about anger, going from your core feelings and emotions of the moment. But I think what happens is you talk about this bucket list that's kind of the hook of the film, even if that's not ultimately what it's about. I think for a lot of people, they hear about someone who never got to do the things they wanted to and starting to actually realize there's more to life than work. And it happens. How are you as a filmmaker negotiating yourself as a son versus someone who's writing this story in real time? Is that complicated to do?
Yes. Yes. There were so many times that I was filming my mom, and I shot a good amount of the film, though I was able to hire a crew later on to shoot particularly the bucket list adventures. But in the really deepest, personal, most intimate moments that you see in the film, that's me shooting that. And it is very hard to watch your mom, suffer, cry, be so emotional in front of you and not want to put down the camera and, give her a hug, give her space, all of that. And so there was a constant battle with myself to say, like, why are you shooting this right now? Put down the camera, be here with her without this lens. But so often I thought, well, if somebody else can see her pain at being disposed of so late in life for no reason, that opens up the world for so many people to know that they're not alone, right? That her story is their story. And so I did that. I just kept shooting. And when the camera was down, really kind of took time to be there with her because that's what she needed. But it was definitely a hard struggle for me.
You mentioned when you start out filming, you're doing that yourself and you're kind of finding the story as you go. At first, it starts out as these interviews with your mom just about what's happening, what has just transpired. At what point does the bucket list, as we said, become kind of this device to tell this larger story, at least one of the devices?
Yeah, well, initially I started shooting not knowing that it would be a feature film. So I just thought, let me get her testimony. Then it became, okay, Mom, like thinking of really crazy ideas that would take her away from her sadness. And then I thought, okay, how do we go even bigger? I always thought, I would just shoot like her milking a cow, or I would shoot her, baking a cake, whatever. And those would be sort of these 5-minute episodes, these small like little bits of mom goes on an adventure,
Right, like little vignettes.
Exactly.
Kind of.
And then with the weight of the firing and her trying to get back on her feet, because she does need a new job. She cannot afford to sort of live without a job. I thought, okay, this is actually so nuanced. There's so much here. There's this sort of these dreamlike opportunities to go skydiving and to go, make amends with her family in England. Like these are like moments of fantasy, almost moments that most people don't actually get to ever do. But then there's the harsh reality of her real life, that she had 2 weeks pay when she was fired, that she had to leave the apartment that we had lived in for 40 years, that she needed a job. And so the film really kind of just swerves back and forth to saying, this is this dream life that love and intergenerational care can bring you, this bucket list adventure, this like your best self. But the reality of the situation is that most people won't have that experience, and that this is their lived reality, is trying to find a job, trying to figure out how they're going to live day to day. And so in the selling of the film and the marketing of the film, it was always important to front the bucket list because, as you say, right, like that's the thing that's going to get people into theaters. That's the thing that's going to get people to dream. That's the thing that's going to get people to feel like they can escape. But it was important for me that the film also showed the real realities of financially insecure older people in this country.
So you started filming this alone, and then you said that over the span of time, you kind of start working with the crew. At what point does funding come into play, and how do you cultivate that enough to keep the momentum going to film over? How many years was this shot?
5 years.
Yeah, you did your time. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I did. So I had initially crowdfunded. So I raised $60,000 for our first real bucket list shoots. And I went to Kickstarter. I told everybody that I wanted to make this film about my mom, and I had shot some of it already. I showed a really early trailer, talked about the film, the importance of sort of intergenerational care and ageism and all of that. Raised $60,000 within a month, which was amazing. We went viral with that early trailer. It was seen 36 million times on Facebook. So that really helped sort of kickstart our community quite literally.
Can I just ask how you're saying that very nonchalantly, which I respect. You're like, no big deal. But how do you go from starting a Kickstarter to all of a sudden 136 million engagements?
36 million.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, it wasn't as big as you thought it was.
Yeah. I'm like 2 billion
yeah, exactly.
views a second.
Only 36 million views. So yeah, I think it was a few things. I'm really savvy. Obviously, I've worked in news for a while, as I mentioned. And so I'm really savvy about news hooks. And I'm really savvy about, what is going to make people share, talk, click. And so I had dropped the trailer and started the Kickstarter right around Mother's Day, and knowing that would be a hook for people to be like, oh my God, this beautiful story of this ultimate bucket list adventure, and the news picked it up. I mean, we were on CBS Sunday Morning in 2017. We were on Now This. I mean, just like everywhere. And yeah, so that's how I did it. It sounds simpler than I guess it was. It took so much pre-thought and strategy and connections and emailing people and pleading with people for money. I mean, doing a crowdfunding campaign is very difficult, and it definitely takes a lot of time, but it is so worth it because then you're off to the races with, in my example, $60,000 to really start to shoot a film, particularly as a first-time filmmaker. Like, that gives you so much license to go and do something on your own terms, which I think a lot of filmmakers don't often get, right? If you're getting $60,000 of investment from somebody, or you're co-producing something, then you already have somebody in your ear, requiring you to do this or that. Crowdfunding gives you the ability to be free as a creative. And so I was really happy that we went that route. And then I got an investment of $100,000, and then raised all the rest through donations. So some were public donations, some were high wealth individuals who just donated tons of money. And I cobbled it together that way.
And is the investment of $100,000 from a private investor as well?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you've cobbled together this money, and as a first-time filmmaker, are you debating how you should spend this money? How, what is the trajectory? I guess, is there a plan? Like, obviously you cultivate the story a bit and you're like, we're going to go on a bucket list. Mm-hmm. But this story has many layers to it. It obviously very greatly sustains itself for the duration of a feature length. And to do that, there's a lot of script writing happening. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of work in the editing room. How, as a first-time filmmaker, are you deciding on what steps to take?
Oh my God, Jacob. It was
Are you having a flashback?
Seriously. I guess I'll start by saying I always deeply believed that I could make a feature film and that it would be strong. And I don't know if that was because I believed in myself so deeply. I believed in my mom and her story so deeply. I had believed that there was an audience for it because when the crowdfunding campaign proved, to me, that there were people who saw themselves in my mom's story and wanted that story to be told. And that's why they donated money, right? So for those three reasons, I kind of was like, I'm going to do this. But as I said before, trying to figure out like the tone of the piece, trying to figure out like how do we go back and forth from these dreamlike escapes to her reality without it feeling too methodical, if you will, without it getting boring or trying or tired after a while. That was really the process. How to make you respect my mom and respect the decisions that she made in life, respect, versus sort of either pitying her or anything like that. So there was a lot of there's a lot to just like sift through. And that's why you have a team, right? I had collaborators, I had editors, I had a producer, I had, people that I could really talk to and who could be objective about the pieces that I couldn't be objective about. And I leaned on them to help me tell the story.
When you built out that team, was a lot of that a result of the connections you had made throughout your years as a journalist, or was this going into new waters?
All new waters.
Okay.
I didn't know any of these people but one from my news background. There are different worlds. The funding is different. The types of editors you get are different. The types of producers are different. I mean, it's also different. And so I had met my producer through a friend, and she had just left a big gig in Silicon Valley and was looking to do something new, and I trusted her and she believed in me, and so we thought, we're both hustlers, we can make this happen. So it was her first film too, being a producer, and then through friends met our editor, and it just it went that way. I was a part of a couple media doc labs. They helped me sort of expand my network of Firelight and Film Independent. And it was just a lot of learning, a lot of asking questions, a lot of asking for help at every stage, not being too proud, and just telling people what I was doing, because people love to help, don't they? I mean, sometimes the help is not helpful.
Right.
But
Depends how we define
yeah,
help. Let's start
exactly.
there.
But hey, it's always great to get the help or get the suggestions, and then you can decide whether you want to work with these people or not. And so I was not the person to be shy about telling people what I was working on and asking for help.
I mean, I think what's phenomenal about this film, aside from just it being a great film, is the fact that there was such a wide reach, and the distribution is kind of amazing from a first-time filmmaker. And I feel like I keep saying first-time filmmaker. Mm-hmm. That could sound condescending, but I just mean it's like
true.
You're jumping into new waters and you figured this all out. Mm-hmm. Is there a distribution strategy while you're making the film? Is this already in motion, or is this after the fact?
It's a great question. And one of my biggest frustrations actually about the state of independent documentary filmmaking. For me, again, as I said, I was always really confident, and some would say overconfident, but I wouldn't. I would just say confident in the fact that, again, I had a great character, I had a great story, I had a community. We were in the New York Times in 2019 about this story, and it was, a feature story. And so there were so many moments that I kind of could say, okay, we have 38 million views already. We have a community of 75,000 followers. We've been in the New York Times. We've been on Now This. We've been on CBS Sunday Morning. Like, who doesn't want this story, right? That's how I approached it. And so I was really confident about distribution, and also knew that if everybody said no to me from the distributor standpoint, I would still be able to get it out there myself. And that was a privilege that I had because of the community that we had been able to build. But when time came around for distribution, I went the standard route that a lot of filmmakers go, if you can, which is do the festivals, have an agent, go out to distributors. For me, my experience, nobody bit.
While you're doing this, are your producers finding an agent? Do you know someone? Do they approach you at the festival?
I'm hustling it all.
Okay,
gotcha. My producer is helping, but I'm really hustling. I'm talking to people at Sundance, at a party that I'm not supposed to be at, and getting a referral for 2 agents from a lawyer that I had just met, from a really high-powered lawyer there. Like, that is the level of hustle that I have, You've
got disguises on, secret briefcases,
exactly.
all of the above.
I'm like, I came in here with an assignment, and I'm going to ace the assignment, okay? And that's
right.
finding an agent, So I did all that, and, laid out quite literally like all of the facts about this film and this story and the success, and said, I need you, like, there's no way that somebody doesn't want this. Like, and nobody wanted it. And then the last minute, we got an opportunity from a studio, a pretty big studio, who wanted to buy the film, but they wanted all rights in perpetuity, and for a sum that I felt like wasn't enough. And so I thought, well, I'm not going to give away my mom's story in perpetuity forever for this sum. I guess I'm just going to have to distribute it myself. Like, this doesn't make sense to me. And this sort of the same time, PBS had reached out and said that they were interested in licensing the film. Independent Lens found me through, I think, like the doc labs, because they sort of like track, all of the projects that are kind of going through these labs.
Gotcha.
And so they had sort of tangentially, or at the same time as this other studio said, hey, put in a bid. And I thought, well, they won't handle theatrical or anything. They're only handling broadcast. If I can pull off a marketing strategy where I release the film on Mother's Day of 2021 in theaters, because theaters were finally open then great. I'll have my theatrical taking place, and then I'll have my broadcast, and then we can figure out streaming. And so that's what we did, and had 2 months to put together a theatrical strategy.
That's not a lot of time.
Not a lot of time, because we were waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And that's all filmmakers do, sadly, is wait for other people to make decisions that, often don't serve them. So
sounds about right. Pretty accurate.
Yeah, I just like, it's crazy. And so anyway, I did do that because as a first time filmmaker, I felt like I needed to at least try, and if I could, take the typical routes, then I wanted to try those routes. But then I hired or worked with Mia Bruno at Fourth Act Films. She does all self-distribution stuff. We were in 30 theaters. We were a #1 Apple News story over Mother's Day. We were on CBS Sunday Morning again. We were, on the Tamron Hall show, literally everywhere. And that really kicked off us in full steam before we made it to Independent Lens in November of 2021. PBS.
You make a good point, because I think a lot of times, to go off what you were saying, independent filmmakers are so focused on getting the finished product together, they don't think about how much impact they can have if they think about all these moving parts of distribution.
Yes, that, and also like value the work, like value your work. What I realize, and I'm a bit of an entrepreneur, and, I'm different than a lot of filmmakers in that, like, I really do care about selling the work too. I don't care just about making the work itself. I will say that my film is not, like the most cinematic film that you might see from a documentary filmmaker. It's truth, it's honest, it's beautiful, it's compelling, it's all of those things. But I'm also thinking about how can this resonate with people? Like and how many people, and what is the number of what that looks like, right? Like, how much should you get paid for this? And so for me, it was always really important to make it make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, then do it myself.
One of the things, too, that I think is so amazing about this is it feels very impactful in terms of your film explores these social issues, and there's many conversations surrounding this film after people have watched it. It appears that you've worked with organizations surrounding it. Mm-hmm. As you were making it, was the goal to make a film that was socially impactful? Is that part of the process while you're in a corner with the camera filming your mom? You're also thinking about, how is this going to be socially impactful?
Yeah. I mean, as I said before, social justice has always been a part of me. My mom, raised 2 Black kids as a white British woman in the middle of Boston in the 80s. You know what I'm saying? We fought racism often. We grew up without very much money, and yet had access to really rich worlds. And so I constantly had this sort of double consciousness, and also this want to fight for justice, for equality. And so while filming the film, so many of the things that made me angry were the activist part of me wanted to tell this film to to sort of contribute to the activism against ageism, for example, against financial insecurity, for example. But you can't do all of that in a film. You have to follow the story. You know what I'm saying? And so I always knew that after the film that I could do an impact campaign that would allow for us to really tease out the themes within the film. And so we were able to get some funding for an impact campaign that ran from November of 2020, which was our debut at Doc NYC, all the way through our November of 2021, our PBS debut. And we worked with AARP, where we had the #2 most watched film in AARP history. And then National Council on Aging, the World Health Organization, we did a screening with them because they have a Decade of Healthy Aging campaign. So really thinking about who are the partners that could really speak to the issues within the film. How could we go deeper? How could we show it to audiences that it would really move? And how could we have a discussion afterwards? And so we wrote discussion guides. We connected people with each other that might be helpful, things like that, really to make it a robust campaign. So it went beyond just what you saw in 71 minutes, that people could decide what they wanted to do in 30 seconds, in 30 days, in 300 days, if they really wanted to commit themselves to any of the issues, ageism, economic insecurity, or the need for intergenerational care.
When you were planning, at some point down the line to utilize this film for social impact, did you define what a successful social impact campaign could look like? Because a lot of times it's easy to talk in the abstract. Mm-hmm. It's like, we want this to be impactful, but what does that mean? And what did that mean to you?
We had some numbers that we wanted to hit. So for example, one of the lighter things that we did was to create a PDF that people could download that would ask some questions about their own bucket list. What would they create? And the reason for that was because during COVID, so many elders were socially isolated. And this allowed them to sort of dream about what they would do when the world sort of opened back up again. And we wanted at least, 2,500 downloads of that packet, which we were able to do. We wanted to show this to over 1,000 individuals who we felt like were most in need of seeing this film. Either they were financially insecure or they were an older individual and socially isolated. And so we worked with different retirement communities, AARP, for example, to be able to reach that number. We had over 10,000 people watch the film via AARP alone, and that was at no cost to them if they were an AARP member. And so we blew those numbers out of the water because we continued to do that. And then we had a really pie in the sky goal, which was, how do we get folks to have a conversation, parents and their kids, around financial stability? How do we broach the conversation about what happens when your parent is at retirement age or beyond that? Like, how much money do they have to survive? How invested will you have to be? What is the plan, right? These questions that we don't talk about.
It can be a sensitive issue. I think sometimes we're afraid to actually speak about the truths that exist.
Exactly. And that still remains the hardest goal of ours to really unravel because people are so personal, because either young people are afraid to ask their parents, or their parents are too prideful or too discreet to talk about it. And so we're really kind of still struggling with that and trying to find partners who can help us broach that conversation.
So this is an ongoing campaign.
It's definitely slowed down as I think about new opportunities and new jobs and new gigs. But the film is out in the world. People are still, just coming into contact with the film. And so the conversation will continue to go on, and we will facilitate as much as we can from this point moving forward. And it's only going to get more and more important. I think this film will only gain in relevance, which was part of the reason I didn't want to sell away all the rights, was because every day, 10,000 people are turning 65 plus in this country every day, and that number is only going to grow. And so more and more older people are going to live longer on less, and they're going to want a film like this that shows them in their lived reality. And so I think there are a lot more things that we can do moving forward.
One thing that when I was watching the film that struck me is I'm not at retirement age, thankfully, because I have a lot of saving to do. But, it really struck me. The issues explored in this film are ones we can't outrun, right? We all age. That's the inevitable. Has making this film change your perspective in how you navigate life, what your work means to you and what your goals are?
Yes and no. Yes, I'll start with no, because I have only ever had a quote unquote real job for 2 years, in my first 2 years out of college. The jobs at CNN and MTV were contract jobs. I was contracted to do some work. So my parents, I think their hard work allowed for me to live a life where I was educated and could figure out how to navigate money and jobs and stuff on my own. So I'm so thankful that they sacrificed so much for me. With that said, I think in having run my own ship for the last, 13 years or so, I don't ever have an interest in working full time for an employer, because I think more and more, as we're seeing with these labor unions and stuff, it's like people don't trust employers, right? And frankly, employers are doing what's in their best interest or the best interest of their shareholders, not always what's in the best interest of their workers. And I think a lot of people are really waking up to that, to say like, why am I working so hard? Why do you have access to me at 9 p.m. when I'm trying to put my child to sleep, and you think you have full access to me when you're not willing to give me 6 months off when I have another kid? It's just the balance between employer and employee relations is so off right now, where the president of a company or CEO of a company can take 65 times what their lowest employee is making. I mean, that's bonkers. So the world is waking up to that. I'm certainly woke to it, and think that is really critically going to need to change, or we are in really, really dire straits.
Yeah, it's an upcoming crisis. If
Yeah.
something does not change.
Yeah, and you're living till 90, right? Like, I mean, they say that millennials are going to live on average, till 90 years old at least, right? If we're in America, if we're living till 90 years old, do you think you're ever going to be able to save enough to actually live that long? Like, let me tell you, Jacob, the answer is no.
There has to be an exit strategy,
yeah.
I guess, somehow.
Nobody's like, okay, like the math isn't mathing, like this isn't adding up.
Feels like we just all have our fingers in our ears being like, well, now listening.
We'll figure it out,
Yeah.
right? And so it's a really, really serious issue.
Yeah, we can't solve that today, unfortunately.
I know.
I wish we could be like, listeners, here's what you do.
And I don't mean to make it be really kind of like dun dun dun, but
no, these are the realities you're speaking to.
These are
right?
the realities. But the light part of the film is, and the story is that, like, ideally you have a community around you, or one person who can make you feel like you have everything, like that can support you through the hardest, darkest of times. Maybe they bring you on a bucket list adventure, or maybe they just sit next to you. The most important thing to me is that I never do it alone. I never have to struggle through that alone. And so I always try and keep people close and be close to people who need me. And that's kind of all we can do, I think, as humans.
It's important to remember. It's easy to forget about how that's kind of the true necessity of humanity.
That's right.
To have those connections. Speaking in those terms, obviously this was a huge collaboration with your mother. Did that change your relationship with her in any ways? Looking back from when this journey started, when you filmed with her, to now, has anything changed? Is it different? Do you see each other differently?
Well, my mom lives with me and my partner now here in New York. And so the story is ongoing.
Okay.
I think as it's capsuled to the film, however, I don't think our relationship changed. I think you noticed in the film, and most people noticed, that like we have this bond that is just incredible. I mean, I feel so special and so lucky that I have always seen my mom as my team partner, my player, my best friend, the person I would fight for the most. And so that didn't change. What changed for me was that I got to see my mom as human in making this film, not just as a mom, right? And I don't think a lot of us get that opportunity to sort of like see your mom face to face with her own regrets, to see her talk about them with you, to ask any question you ever had to your mom, to not leave anything dangling. I got all of those opportunities by making this film. And so in that way, we are bonded beyond, but our relationship remains the same. But I now have a legacy, a deeper legacy to be able to pass on to anybody who ever asks about her after her passing, And I feel really, really, really grateful to be able to have that opportunity. Now, living with my mom as an adult, our relationship is like morphing and changing because she's getting older, and like I'm caregiving in a lot of ways. But my mom is super active and like doesn't really need my help on a lot of things. But there are levels of care, there are frustrations, there are deeper moments of seeing somebody get older in front of you that I'm working through now. So yeah.
It's complicated. I feel like I can only speak for America because that's where I grew up, but it feels like we don't really value the aging population a lot of times, even if it's our own family.
At all.
Yeah.
At all. The older people are invisible in this society. They are thrown away. They are looked past. Everywhere you look is another sign that you should not get older. Though it is this really beautiful thing. It really is a rite of passage to be able to sit and watch my mom sort of grapple with new things as she gets older. But the truth is, she's just as like vibrant and malleable and curious as she's always been. She's just like 10 feet away from me now versus, in a whole other city. Sometimes I'm like, you're too curious today, Mom. You're going to have to leave me alone.
No detective work today,
right?
Mom.
Exactly.
Let's just chill on that for right now, please. How did she, after the film was completed, did she speak about how it changed her life in any way? I don't want you to speak for her, but I wonder if you ever had those conversations.
Yeah, and we've been on a million interviews, so from what she said in other interviews, it changed her life. I think my mom realized that she had an advocate in me. Knowing that she had an advocate really changed her life, and that touches me forever. Beyond that, my mom finally sees herself as the star she always is, which is a good thing and a bad thing.
That ego. Yeah, that ego.
Listen, my mom will walk down the street and she'll be talking to somebody and she's like, "Oh, you don't know who I am?" And she'll just, but like in some ways it makes sense because just on my way today to here, somebody on Instagram that I don't know DM'd me and said, "Hey, was your mom in Philadelphia yesterday? I know this is a weird question, but I swear I saw her in West Philadelphia." And I'm like, who are you? B, like, we have sightings of my mom now, so she's totally like deluded. She believes it's like totally real.
She's living the influencer lifestyle.
She's totally living. She's verified. She's totally living the influencer lifestyle. And so it's wonderful that she owns it. She really does. It is really beautiful.
It's crazy. It is like her life changed. It sounds like it.
Yeah, to be a housekeeper in a hotel in Boston that nobody has ever heard of, to being this global viral sensation, like it must be, she's just living with a capital L.
When you look back on that journey from where you started making this feature film to now, is there anything that you think of that you carry with you the most?
Jacob, I think so much of my journey as a filmmaker was 90% believing that I had a story that was worthy of telling. But there was always 10% of fear that it wouldn't happen. And particularly because it was a personal film, every no meant so much more to me. Having gone through the experience and having had time to reflect on it, I'm not scared anymore to tell any story that I ever want to tell. I don't question my abilities anymore. You can Google me and know what I have the capacity to do. And that fills me with so much light and so much confidence. That's not arrogant confidence, but this industry at every turn will tell you and tell you cannot do something, that you don't have the connections, the audience, the resources, the power. And it makes filmmakers feel powerless. But I don't feel powerless. I did it myself. I did it on my own terms. And I did it for my mom. And look how far it's gone. And so I walk through the world so much lighter, with so much more power, and so confident that any story that I believe is strong enough to tell will make it out there. And I hope that more filmmakers, more storytellers are filled up with the feeling that I have now. And if they're ever sort of doubting that they have the ability, I would just say keep pushing through it, because this feeling there's no greater feeling to walk to any room and not be afraid.
Sian-Pierre, I appreciate you spending this time with us today. You will always have priority over Carson Daly if you want to book some time here. So just know that. And thank you.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
From the New York City Center for Media Education, this has been CME Presents. Available wherever you get your podcasts. Music is by Jacob Backer, William Hutchison, and Sean Sparacino. If you like what you hear, please rate, subscribe, and review. And don't forget to check out our website at nyccenterformediaeducation.org for more information about media making and filmmaking classes.